$45,000. That's what these HOA vultures charged me for destroying my family's lake mansion over supposed
zoning violations.
No warning, no hearing, no mercy. I came home from deployment in Eastern Europe to find my grandfather's 1950s fishing retreat reduced to rubble. 3 generations of memories gone. My 16-year-old son's favorite fishing spot buried under mud and broken concrete. Childhood photos trampled in the dirt. Walking through the debris felt just like Kandahar after a blast. Glass crunching under my boots, trigger finger twitching. They thought a deployed soldier couldn't fight back. Big mistake. Because Grandpa didn't just leave me the house. He left me the original land deeds to everything. And I'm about to deliver the sweetest counterattack these Karens have ever seen. What would you do? Smash if you want HOA justice. Drop your state below, let's go. Let me back up and tell you who I am. Colonel Jake Thornfield, 52 years old, Army Corps of Engineers with 28 years of service. That lakefront mansion wasn't just any house. It was built by my grandfather in 1950 as his fishing retreat after he came back from World War II. 3 generations of Thornfield men had learned to cast a line from that same weathered dock. My recent divorce had left me emotionally anchored to this one stable place. The peaceful lake setting wasn't just nice to have, it was crucial for managing my PTSD from an IED explosion in Afghanistan. My 16-year-old son lived in California with his mother now, but our annual bonding happened right here, teaching him the same lessons about patience and precision that Grandpa had taught me in that workshop behind the house. The workshop where I'd learned to build, fix, and solve problems with my hands still held his surveying equipment from his railroad days. There was something magical about those old brass instruments, the way they could measure property lines down to the inch. Grandpa always said, measure twice, cut once, and always know exactly where you stand. Now let me introduce you to the woman who thought she could steal it all. Kendall Westbrook, 38, HOA president and luxury real estate broker who drove a white Range Rover like she was leading a safari instead of terrorizing a Georgia lake community. Always dressed in designer athleisure with perfectly styled blonde hair, even for grocery store runs. Her office wall was covered with sold signs from million-dollar lake properties, and she had a particular talent for targeting military families and blue-collar residents with mysterious violations. The smell of her expensive perfume couldn't quite mask the stench of corruption that followed her around community meetings. She had this way of clicking her manicured nails on hard surfaces when she was plotting something, a sound that made my skin crawl worse than incoming mortar fire. While I was deployed, Kendall had orchestrated what she called an emergency architectural review. Funny how emergencies always seem to happen when the property owner is 8,000 miles away serving his country. The community meeting minutes showed new waterfront harmony standards passed by a 3-2 vote, with my proxy vote mysteriously going missing from the mail. The demolition notice was mailed to my military address overseas and arrived 3 days after my house was already a pile of splinters. Neighbors later mentioned how Kendall had personally supervised the bulldozer operation, taking photos for what she called compliance records. I'd bet my military pension those photos were actually for her development portfolio. You see, Kendall's real plan was brilliantly simple and completely evil. She wanted my 5-acre prime lakefront property to subdivide into 8 luxury lots worth $3.2 million total. But first, she needed to remove the obstacle, me and my family's 70-year claim to the most valuable piece of real estate on the lake. The texture of my grandfather's worn surveying tools felt familiar in my hands as I dug through his military footlocker looking for insurance documents. That's when I started to suspect this wasn't just about architectural standards or community harmony. This was about money, power, and a predatory developer who thought a deployed soldier couldn't fight back. Little did Kendall know, she'd just declared war on someone trained by the United States Army to solve complex engineering problems under pressure. And brother, I was about to survey this situation with military precision. But first I had to deal with that $45,000 bill sitting on what used to be my kitchen table, now buried somewhere under the rubble of my childhood sanctuary. 3 days after I discovered the demolition disaster, Kendall delivered that $45,000 bill with her signature smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. She stood there in her white Range Rover driver's seat, window rolled down just enough to hand me the invoice while keeping her air conditioning running. "Colonel Thornfield, I'm sure you understand we had to act quickly for safety reasons," she purred, her voice dripping with fake concern. The bill itemized everything: bulldozer rental, dump truck fees, hazardous material disposal for what used to be my grandfather's workshop. But here's the kicker. She'd added $500 per day in cleanup fees that would keep accumulating until I brought the lot into compliance. And since I was currently living in a camping trailer on my own property, she claimed that violated temporary structure ordinances. The financial pressure hit like a sniper's bullet. My military salary couldn't cover escalating fees that multiplied daily like compound interest on steroids. Neighbors who used to wave when I drove by now avoided eye contact, suddenly finding their smartphones very interesting whenever I walked past. The smell of barbecue smoke from backyard gatherings would drift over to my campsite. But invitation-wise, radio silence. My insurance company turned into a bureaucratic nightmare, stalling my claim while requesting proper permits for the demolition. When I explained that no permits existed, the adjuster actually laughed. "Sir, you can't demolish a structure without permits. Someone filed the paperwork," except someone hadn't, and that someone was about to learn what happens when you mess with military paperwork standards. The worst part came during a video call with my son in California. He'd seen social media posts from local kids calling me the military guy who trashed community property values. Watching my 16-year-old try to defend his father's honor while not understanding what was happening broke something inside me that hadn't been broken since Afghanistan. But here's the thing about military training. It teaches you to gather intelligence before launching counterattacks. I requested an emergency HOA meeting, demanding a detailed explanation for the demolition timing. Kendall's manicured nails tapped nervously on the community center table as I presented my questions with the same systematic precision I'd used for mission briefings. Why was the demolition scheduled for the exact day before my return from deployment? Why were no environmental impact studies conducted near the lake? Why did the emergency timeline prevent any appeals process? Each question landed like artillery, and I could see sweat forming under Kendall's expensive makeup. I started documenting everything with military precision, photographing property boundaries with my grandfather's old surveying equipment, recording conversations on my phone, mapping neighbor traffic patterns using the same observational skills that had kept me alive overseas. Every measurement was checked twice, every detail logged with coordinates and timestamps. My grandfather's worn brass compass felt steady in my hands as I established exact property corners. The metallic click of the surveying instruments reminded me of weapons maintenance, familiar, methodical, purposeful. I filed an insurance fraud complaint when the company admitted no demolition permits existed in county records. That's when the first mini twist hit like a chess move I hadn't seen coming. The insurance investigator called me back 3 days later with information that made my engineering brain start calculating angles of attack. "Colonel, we've got a problem," he said, his voice tight with concern. "Your HOA president never filed proper demolition permits with the county. No safety inspections, no environmental assessments, no legal notifications. The destruction was completely illegal." But wait, it gets better. The investigator mentioned multiple similar cases involving properties Kendall wanted for development deals. Apparently, I wasn't her first target. She had a pattern of manufacturing housing emergencies while property owners were conveniently absent. I learned something that week that every homeowner should know. Demolition permits aren't optional paperwork. They're legal requirements that protect both property owners and communities. Without proper permits, tearing down someone's house isn't code enforcement, it's criminal destruction of property. As I sat in my camping trailer that night listening to the sound of boats returning to the community dock, I realized this wasn't just about my house anymore. This was about a predatory system that targeted military families specifically because our deployment schedules made us vulnerable to bureaucratic ambushes. Kendall had made one critical mistake, though. She'd assumed that destroying my house would break my spirit and force me to sell cheap. Instead, she'd just given a combat engineer a very interesting problem to solve, and I was about to apply every lesson the Army had taught me about strategic planning under fire. 2 weeks after the insurance revelation, Kendall escalated with move number 2 in her real estate chess game. She invented something called environmental setback requirements, claiming my entire waterfront parcel violated newly discovered wetland regulations. Standing in my campsite with official-looking documents, she delivered the threat with that same practice smile: $1,000 daily fines until I considered a reasonable buyout offer, $400,000, for land worth over $1 million. The offer arrived on HOA letterhead the same day she threatened those environmental fines, because subtle isn't exactly Kendall's strong suit. Meanwhile, I discovered she'd quietly listed a future luxury development opportunity with local developers, describing my 5-acre lakefront as soon available for subdivision. The woman was literally selling my property while standing on it, breathing air that smelled like honeysuckle and theft. The financial pressure mounted like water behind a dam. Legal fees for fighting fabricated violations started eating my military savings. My bank threatened to call my mortgage due to compliance issues. Apparently, having an enemy of the state as your HOA president affects your creditworthiness. My ex-wife called from California, voice tight with concern. "Jake, I won't let our son visit if this HOA drama continues. Fix this." That last conversation felt like taking shrapnel to the chest all over again. But here's what Kendall didn't know about military engineers. We're trained to find structural weaknesses under pressure. I called my Army buddy Marcus, who'd transitioned from combat engineering to civilian civil engineering after our Afghanistan deployment. "Jake, you need a professional boundary survey," he said over the phone. "Something smells rotten about their property claims." Marcus drove down from Atlanta the next weekend with GPS equipment that could measure property lines down to the centimeter. Watching him work reminded me of bomb disposal, methodical, precise, life or death attention to detail. While he established exact coordinates, I installed security cameras around my property perimeter, documenting every vehicle that used what Kendall called community facilities. The patterns that emerged were fascinating from an intelligence perspective. The same neighbors who avoided me during the day were driving across my land multiple times daily to access the boat launch. Their kids rode bikes through my property to reach the community dock. Even Kendall's white Range Rover appeared in my footage, parked directly on what I was beginning to suspect might be my private land. I filed public records requests for all HOA communications, meeting minutes, and financial transactions, the paper trail that bureaucrats always leave behind. What I found made my combat-trained paranoia look like childish optimism. Kendall's development company had received consulting fees from 3 different buyers interested in lakefront property. She wasn't just stealing my land, she was pre-selling it. Then Marcus called with survey results that hit like an artillery strike on target. "Jake, you need to sit down for this," he said, his engineer's voice carefully neutral. "Your property line doesn't match the HOA boundary maps, not even close." The original 1947 county records showed my property extending 200 feet further than current HOA maps indicated. 200 feet of prime lakefront that included the community beach access road, the boat ramp, and the parking area that 60-plus homes depended on for lake access. Here's a knowledge nugget that every property owner needs burned into their brain. Property lines are like birth certificates. The original document is what matters, not photocopies made decades later. Someone had adjusted the community maps to steal 200 feet of waterfront worth more than some people's entire houses. The mini twist in this escalation loop wasn't just about money, it was about power. The community beach access road that everyone used, including Kendall during her daily boat launches, ran entirely through my private property. Every single neighbor had been unknowingly trespassing for years while I was blamed for property violations. Marcus explained it in terms that made my engineering brain light up with possibilities. Easements require written agreements between property owners. Using someone's land for decades doesn't make it yours. It's just trespassing with a statute of limitations. That night, sitting in my camping trailer with surveying documents spread across my fold-out table, I realized the scope of Kendall's theft. She hadn't just stolen my house. She'd been facilitating mass trespassing while positioning herself as the community's legal authority. Every boat launch, every beach party, every community event had been happening on land my grandfather homesteaded in 1947. The sound of boat trailers scraping across asphalt I legally owned echoed through the Georgia evening air. Somewhere in the distance I could hear laughter from a community barbecue held on my private beach, organized by the woman who'd destroyed my family home and was now trying to steal my family land. But Kendall had made a critical tactical error. She'd given a combat engineer access to the one thing that trumps HOA politics: legal property boundaries measured with military precision. 3 weeks after Marcus's survey bombshell, Kendall played her most aggressive card yet. I woke up one Tuesday morning to find a locked gate across my driveway positioned at the exact spot where her falsified property maps claimed community land began. A professionally printed sign read, Community road maintenance, temporary access restriction, HOA management. The gate forced me to park on the public street and hike through woods to reach my camping trailer, carrying groceries and supplies like I was on patrol in hostile territory. For someone with PTSD triggered by blocked access routes, memories of IED roadblocks that had nearly killed me overseas, this wasn't just inconvenient. It was psychological warfare. The smell of fear sweat became familiar again as thunderstorms rolled across the lake and I couldn't quickly reach shelter. During one video call with my son, he watched his father have an anxiety attack because rain was hammering my trailer and I couldn't get to my truck. No 16-year-old should have to see their dad reduced to that. Postal service stopped delivering to my address. Emergency vehicles couldn't reach my property. When I called the fire department to ask about access during emergencies, the dispatcher's silence spoke volumes. Kendall had effectively turned my 5-acre homestead into an island surrounded by bureaucratic quicksand. But here's the thing about military training that civilians often miss. We're taught to turn obstacles into advantages. That locked gate became evidence of illegal imprisonment, false claim of authority, and interference with mail delivery. Every day I documented the gate's existence, photographed the lack of legal signage, and recorded attempts by neighbors to apologize for something they thought they couldn't control. I brought in a professional surveyor with military-grade GPS equipment, the kind used for precision artillery targeting. The metallic beeping of GPS coordinates being locked felt like coming home after a long deployment. This wasn't just about property lines anymore. This was about establishing undeniable truth in a battlefield of lies. The surveyor's findings were devastating to Kendall's entire scheme. Every vehicle using the community boat ramp was trespassing on my private land. The parking area where neighbors left their cars during lake activities? My property. The community dock where families gathered for evening fishing? Built on my private lake frontage. I started filing formal trespassing complaints against 15 homeowners who launched boats on my land, complete with time-stamped photographs and GPS coordinates. The legal language was beautifully simple. Unauthorized use of private property for recreational vehicle launching without permission from landowner. Each complaint requested $50 per day in damages, multiplied by years of illegal usage. My private property, military personnel only signs went up along the actual boundary lines, positioned with the same precision we'd used for perimeter security overseas. The visual impact was immediate. Neighbors suddenly realized they'd been driving across someone's private driveway to reach their boats. Then came the mini twist that changed everything. The professional survey definitively proved that the entire beach access system, road, boat ramp, community dock, parking area, and even the pavilion where HOA meetings were held, sat on my private land. 60-plus homes had been illegally trespassing for over 15 years without easement agreements. Here's the legal knowledge that every property owner should understand. Easements require written legal agreements between property owners. Community use of private land, no matter how long-standing, doesn't automatically create public rights. It's just mass trespassing that's been ignored by authorities. The HOA had been operating facilities worth $800,000 on stolen property, charging residents fees for access to amenities they had no legal right to provide. Kendall had been collecting community dues for managing property she didn't own, while citing the actual owner for violations. As I sat in my camping trailer that evening, watching the sunset reflect off the lake my grandfather had fished for 70 years, the full scope of the theft became clear. This wasn't just about destroying my house to force a cheap sale. This was about claiming ownership of community infrastructure built on my family's land, then profiting from both the development rights and the ongoing management fees. The sound of boat trailers scraping across asphalt that I legally owned created a symphony of evidence. Every tire track, every oil stain, every footprint in the sand was proof of trespassing that had been happening under my nose while I served my country overseas. Kendall's white Range Rover appeared in my security footage every single day, parked on my private property during her community management activities. The irony was beautiful. She was literally trespassing while writing me violations for existing on my own land. But the best part? She still didn't know that I knew. And a combat engineer with time, legal ammunition, and righteous anger was about to demonstrate the difference between amateur-hour property theft and professional-grade strategic planning. The breakthrough came during a sleepless night 3 weeks after the gate incident. I was digging through my grandfather's military footlocker, searching for insurance documents that might help my claim, when my fingers found something unexpected. A waterproof surveyor's pouch, sealed with wax and tucked behind his old army uniform. Inside was the original 1947 homestead deed, pristine as the day it was signed, along with grandfather's handwritten surveying notes in the precise script they taught railroad engineers. The document was like holding a piece of American history, detailed property boundaries with GPS coordinates that matched Marcus's survey exactly. But here's what made my combat-trained heart start racing. The property boundaries included all the land currently used for community lake access. Every single facility that 60-plus homes depended on sat squarely within the boundaries my grandfather had legally homesteaded 73 years ago. Grandpa's surveying notes revealed the full picture with military precision. Beach access road built 1962 without permission across homestead property. Community dock constructed 1968 on private waterfront. No easement agreements filed county records. Future family must protect boundaries. He'd known this day would come. Sitting there in my camping trailer at 2 in the morning, holding proof of ownership that predated the entire community development, I finally understood Kendall's complete scheme. She needed to remove my mansion and force me off the property to claim adverse possession of the valuable lakefront. The manufactured zoning violations were legal cover for stealing $3.2 million worth of prime real estate. But adverse possession has rules, and here's the legal knowledge nugget that saved my family's legacy. Adverse possession requires open, notorious, and continuous use, but not against an absent military service member. Federal law protects deployed personnel from losing property rights while serving overseas. Kendall had targeted a military family specifically because she thought deployment made us vulnerable, but she'd actually chosen the one type of property owner with legal protection against exactly this scheme. The power shift was seismic. Instead of being the victim of HOA violations, I was now the landlord of an entire community's lake access infrastructure. 60-plus homeowners had been unknowingly trespassing on my private property for over 15 years, and their property values depended entirely on continued access through my land. Without that beach access, lakefront homes would lose $50,000 to $100,000 each in value overnight. Properties marketed as lakefront living would become lake view from a distance, and every real estate agent in the county knew the difference in pricing. I calculated the financial leverage with the same precision I'd used for munitions inventory. 60 homes times $200 monthly access fees times 15 years equals $2.16 million in unpaid usage fees. That didn't even include the current market value of easement rights for community facilities worth $800,000. But this wasn't just about money anymore. Reading grandfather's notes about protecting future family, I realized this was about legacy. He'd surveyed these boundaries knowing that someday someone would try to steal what 3 generations of Thornfield men had built on this lake. The emotional weight of holding that deed, with grandfather's precise measurements and protective warnings, connected me to something bigger than property disputes. This was about honoring the sacrifice of a World War II veteran who'd used his railroad surveying skills to secure a piece of the American dream for his family. Kendall had made a fatal tactical error. She'd assumed that destroying my house would break my spirit and force a desperate sale. Instead, she'd motivated a combat engineer to dig deeper into family history and discover legal ammunition that could destroy her entire development scheme. The community's lifeline ran directly through my property, and I was about to remind everyone involved exactly who controlled the valve. The next morning, I spread grandfather's deed across my camping table and started planning like I was designing a bridge in a war zone. Every detail calculated, every failure point reinforced, every angle of attack considered. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about justice served with military precision. First, the physical preparation. I contacted my military contractor buddy who specialized in hydraulic equipment for forward operating bases. "Jake, you want a retractable barrier system that can stop 60 vehicles?" he asked over the phone. "Brother, I've got surplus hydraulic mechanisms that could stop a convoy of Humvees." The engineering was beautiful in its simplicity. Hydraulic barriers installed under the asphalt of the beach access road, completely invisible until activated. The system could be triggered remotely via smartphone app, raising steel barriers 18 inches high, enough to stop any vehicle but not injure anyone. It was like a military checkpoint, but legal, since it was installed on my private property. Working at night with the precision of a special operations mission, we installed the system at the exact property line confirmed by grandfather's deed. The smell of fresh asphalt and hydraulic fluid reminded me of base construction projects, where getting the engineering right could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. For legal strategy, my JAG lawyer friend drafted trespassing lawsuits against all 60-plus homeowners using my private road without permission. The beauty of mass litigation is mathematical. 60 households times $200 monthly times 15 years equals over $2 million in unpaid access fees, plus current market value for ongoing easement rights. I filed formal easement termination notices with the county recorder, establishing legal timeline for ending unauthorized use of private property. The paperwork was precise as military orders. Notice to all parties currently accessing lakefront facilities via private property. Legal access terminates 30 days from filing unless written easement agreements executed. The financial calculations were staggering when broken down systematically. Current property value without illegal encroachment, $1.2 million. Potential development value for 8 luxury lots, $3.2 million. Legal costs for mass trespassing litigation, $150,000. Insurance settlement for demolished house, $400,000. But the real number that mattered was community dependency. 60 families who would lose $50,000 to $100,000 in property value without lake access. My ally recruitment felt like assembling a mission team. Marcus provided expert surveying testimony that could withstand legal challenges. The JAG lawyer handled mass litigation strategy with the systematic approach that military legal training demands. 3 neighbors, fed up with Kendall's HOA tyranny, agreed to witness testimony about her targeting of military families. The county surveyor, also a veteran, validated original property boundaries with the brotherhood that exists between people who've served. My military contractor buddy supplied hydraulic barrier equipment at cost because supporting fellow veterans isn't just business, it's duty. Here's the technical knowledge that every property owner should understand. Trespassing damages multiply by number of users and duration of illegal use. If one person walks across your land without permission, that's simple trespass. If 60 families drive across your land daily for 15 years, that's systematic theft of property rights worth millions in easement value. The timeline strategy required precision timing that would make a special operations planner proud. Barrier activation was scheduled for the annual Lake Days Festival, when maximum community members would use beach access simultaneously. All 60-plus families would be trapped between the barrier and the lake during peak festival attendance, with maximum witnesses and maximum visual impact for settlement negotiations. Community facilities on private land without easements aren't shared amenities. They're theft infrastructure that generates ongoing legal liability for everyone involved. Every boat launch was documented trespass. Every community event was evidence of illegal land use. Every HOA fee collected for lake access was fraud, since the HOA had no legal right to provide access to property they didn't own. Testing the barrier system at midnight felt like weapons maintenance. Methodical checks of hydraulic pressure, smartphone app connectivity, and complete road blockage capability. The steel barriers rose from asphalt with mechanical precision, creating an impenetrable vehicle obstacle that could be deployed or retracted in 30 seconds. As I stood on my private property at 2 a.m, watching moonlight reflect off the lake that my grandfather had fished for 70 years, the scope of preparation felt overwhelming and perfectly organized simultaneously. Security cameras documented every angle, legal paperwork established irrefutable ownership, financial calculations proved systematic theft, physical barriers waited for activation. Kendall had no idea that her next HOA power play would trigger a strategic response that combined military engineering, legal warfare, and generational property rights into one devastating counterattack. She'd picked a fight with someone trained to solve complex problems under pressure, and the Lake Days Festival was about to become her education in why you don't steal from military families. 4 days before the Lake Days Festival, Kendall made her most desperate move yet. I was documenting property boundaries with my surveying equipment when a black SUV pulled up and 2 men in security uniforms stepped out. Private security, hired to patrol what Kendall was calling community areas, which happened to be my private property. "Sir, you're going to need to move along," the larger guard said, hand resting on his radio. "This is restricted HOA property during maintenance operations." The smell of intimidation tactics hung in the air like cordite after a firefight. They'd positioned themselves between me and my camping trailer, trying to control access to my own land. Kendall had briefed them that I was a mentally unstable veteran who might become violent. She'd created an armed siege atmosphere around my property, with guards intimidating neighbors who tried to talk to me about the escalating situation. The psychological warfare was textbook: isolate the target, control information flow, and create fear of unpredictable military violence. But here's what Kendall didn't understand about military veterans. We're trained to de-escalate confrontations while gathering intelligence. I maintained calm military bearing, never raising my voice or making threatening gestures, but my hidden camera network documented every illegal security activity on my property. "Gentlemen, I appreciate your professionalism," I told them, voice steady as a command briefing. "Can you show me the legal documentation authorizing armed patrol on this property?" The guards exchanged glances that told me everything. They had no idea they were trespassing on private land. When I presented the official survey showing exact property boundaries, the security team's confidence evaporated like morning fog. "Ma'am," I heard the team leader radio to Kendall, "we're going to need to see easement documentation. This gentleman has county records showing private ownership." The mini twist hit like incoming artillery when Kendall couldn't produce legal proof of HOA authority over my property. The security company panicked about liability exposure. Armed trespassing on private property carries serious criminal charges. Within 2 hours, they'd abandoned their contract and driven away, leaving Kendall exposed without her intimidation tactics. The guards later provided testimony that Kendall had hired them under false pretenses, claiming she had legal authority over community property that she actually didn't own. One guard admitted, "She told us the property owner was dangerous, but when we saw his military bearing and legal documentation, we realized we were being used to harass a veteran on his own land." I'd quietly contacted local media about a private militia intimidating veteran on his own property, which generated exactly the kind of attention Kendall desperately wanted to avoid. The state attorney general received complaints about armed trespassing and illegal restriction of property access. Every incident was documented with timestamp photography and GPS coordinates. Here's a knowledge nugget that every property owner should memorize. Private security on someone else's land without permission isn't protection. It's armed trespassing that escalates trespass charges to felony levels. Security companies face massive liability when clients misrepresent property ownership, which is why they verify legal authority before deploying personnel. The escalation backfired spectacularly on Kendall. Instead of intimidating me into submission, her security theater had generated criminal complaints, media attention, and testimony from professional security personnel about her fraudulent representation of property rights. She'd essentially hired witnesses to document her own crimes. County building inspectors received anonymous complaints about unpermitted community facilities on private property. Complaints that included detailed surveys, photographs, and legal documentation proving unauthorized construction on my land. Every structure built without my permission was now subject to immediate removal orders. The financial pressure was shifting dramatically in my direction. Kendall's legal costs for defending against trespassing lawsuits were mounting daily. Property owners in the community started questioning HOA authority when they realized their lake access depended entirely on one man's goodwill. Real estate agents began warning potential buyers about pending property disputes affecting lake access rights. As the Lake Days Festival approached, community tensions reached a breaking point. Neighbors whispered about property lines and easement rights during grocery store conversations. Kids asked parents why the military man couldn't park in his own driveway. Local newspapers started investigating HOA management practices after receiving tips about systematic harassment of military families. Kendall's perfectly styled appearance was becoming disheveled under mounting stress. Her white Range Rover appeared in my security footage multiple times daily as she desperately tried to maintain control over a situation spiraling beyond her authority. The clicking of her manicured nails on hard surfaces had become an aggressive staccato that echoed through community meetings. But the most beautiful part of this escalation was the growing realization among community members that they'd been unknowingly complicit in stealing from a military veteran. The psychological dynamic was shifting from problem neighbor to wronged property owner, and Kendall could feel her social authority evaporating like summer rain on hot asphalt. My smartphone showed the barrier system fully operational and ready for activation. All legal paperwork was filed, all evidence was documented. All allies were positioned for the final confrontation that would settle this property dispute once and for all. The Friday before Lake Days Festival, Kendall made her final desperate gambit. She appeared at my campsite with 3 HOA board members and a notary public, carrying official-looking documents that she claimed would resolve all property disputes amicably. The papers offered me $200,000 for a community easement across my property, permanent access rights worth at least $800,000. "Colonel, this is a generous offer for everyone involved," she said, her voice artificially sweet like artificial sweetener that leaves a bitter aftertaste. "Sign today, and all HOA violations disappear. Refuse and will escalate to county authorities about unpermitted camping on non-conforming property." The ultimatum was beautifully transparent. Accept a fraction of fair value for permanent easement rights or face manufactured legal problems designed to force a sale. She'd positioned the signing for Friday afternoon, less than 48 hours before the festival when maximum community pressure would favor her position. But here's what Kendall still didn't understand about military strategic thinking. Ultimatums only work when the enemy doesn't know your real capabilities. My hidden camera network had documented every trespassing incident, every illegal security deployment, every fraudulent property claim she'd made over the past months. "Ma'am, I appreciate your offer," I replied with the same tone I'd used for declining mission modifications from Pentagon bureaucrats. "Let me review the documents with my legal counsel and get back to you Monday." The delay tactic bought critical time while maintaining professional courtesy that would look good in court testimony. Kendall's frustration was visible in the tension around her eyes, the way her manicured fingers drummed against her designer handbag. She needed my signature before the festival, when community pressure and financial deadlines would force her hand on the development timeline. Every day of delay cost her money and credibility with potential buyers. That weekend, neighbors started approaching my campsite with apologies and questions. "Jake, we had no idea the road was your private property," said Tom from 3 lots over. Kendall told everyone it was community land. The social dynamics were shifting as people realized they'd been manipulated into hostility against someone who'd been protecting their interests all along. My security footage revealed the true scope of community dependency on my property. 60-plus families driving across my land multiple times daily. Kids riding bikes through my property to reach the dock. Delivery trucks using my driveway to reach lakefront homes. Even emergency vehicles accessed several properties via my private road. The mini twist arrived Sunday evening when Kendall made her most aggressive move yet. She filed an emergency restraining order claiming I was threatening community safety by blocking access to public recreation areas. The legal document described me as a potentially unstable military veteran preventing families from accessing community facilities. But restraining orders require evidence of actual threats, and Kendall had none. My documented military bearing, professional communications, and complete compliance with legal procedures undermined every claim in her filing. The judge scheduled an emergency hearing for Monday morning, exactly when the festival was supposed to begin. Here's critical legal knowledge for anyone facing false restraining orders. Emergency protective orders are designed for genuine safety threats, not property disputes. Filing false protection claims is perjury that carries serious criminal penalties, especially when targeting military veterans with documented PTSD. My JAG lawyer friend drove down from Atlanta Sunday night, bringing case files showing Kendall's pattern of targeting military families during deployments. 3 other veterans had faced similar property harassment while serving overseas. The pattern established systematic discrimination against protected military personnel. Monday morning's hearing became Kendall's public destruction. Under oath, she couldn't identify any threatening behavior, violent incidents, or safety concerns beyond my presence on my own property. When the judge asked for evidence of community property rights, she had nothing. No easement agreements, no legal surveys, no property deeds. My attorney presented grandfather's 1947 deed, professional survey confirming boundaries, and documented evidence of systematic trespassing by community members. The judge dismissed Kendall's restraining order and ordered her to pay my legal costs for defending against frivolous litigation. Walking out of that courthouse, I realized the final escalation loop was complete. Kendall had exhausted every legal, social, and bureaucratic weapon in her arsenal. She'd tried destruction, intimidation, bribery, armed harassment, ultimatums, and false protection claims. All had failed because they were built on lies about property ownership that couldn't withstand legal scrutiny. The Lake Days Festival was scheduled to begin in 4 hours. with 60-plus families planning to use my private property for their annual celebration. My smartphone app showed the barrier system ready for activation. Security cameras were positioned at every angle. Legal documentation was filed and approved by county courts. Kendall had one last chance to negotiate fair easement terms, but her pattern of escalation suggested she'd rather fight than admit she'd been stealing from a military veteran for months. The festival would either end with reasonable settlement negotiations or public demonstration of exactly who controlled community access to the lake. Either way, the property dispute that had destroyed my grandfather's mansion was about to be settled with military precision and maximum public accountability. Lake Days Festival. Monday morning dawned clear and humid, perfect Georgia weather for what would become the most memorable community gathering in anyone's memory. By 9 a.m., cars were already streaming down the beach access road toward the boat launch, families loaded with coolers, fishing gear, and inflatable toys for a day on the water. I positioned myself on the hillside overlooking my property with a clear view of the entire access route, smartphone in hand with the barrier activation app ready. The sight was like watching a military convoy enter a kill zone. 60-plus vehicles moving in predictable formation toward a choke point they had no idea was about to be controlled. Kendall arrived in her white Range Rover at exactly 9:30, leading what looked like a victory parade of HOA board members and their families. She'd positioned herself as festival coordinator, directing traffic flow across my property like she owned every square foot of lakefront real estate. The drone footage I'd arranged with Marcus captured the perfect overhead view, a continuous line of cars stretching 200 yards down the beach access road, boat trailers backed up to the water's edge, families setting up pavilions and barbecue grills on my private beach. The visual evidence of mass trespassing was undeniable from any angle. At 10:15, when vehicle density reached maximum capacity and retreat would be impossible, I activated the smartphone app with the same calm precision I'd used for detonating obstacles in Afghanistan. Hydraulic barriers rose from asphalt with mechanical certainty, 18 inches of steel creating an impenetrable roadblock. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. 60-plus vehicles trapped between steel barriers and lake water. Boat trailers jackknifed at impossible angles. Families with lawn chairs and fishing rods stranded on property they'd just discovered wasn't public. The geometric precision of the trap was beautiful. Community members literally cornered on stolen land. Car horns started honking. Confused shouts echoed across the water. Kids asked parents why they couldn't drive home. 3 local news crews, alerted by anonymous tips about community property disputes, arrived to find the perfect visual story, an entire neighborhood trapped by their own illegal behavior. County sheriff deputies responded to multiple blocked road emergency calls, arriving to find a crowd of 200 people demanding explanation for why they couldn't leave a festival. The deputies' confusion was understandable. They'd expected traffic accidents, not precision-engineered property rights demonstrations. That's when I took the festival's public address microphone, speaking with the same clear authority I'd used for military briefings under fire. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my private property. You're standing on land my grandfather homesteaded in 1947, land that's been in my family for 73 years. The crowd fell silent, except for boat engines idling in shallow water and news camera motors whirring. Ms. Westbrook destroyed my family home to steal this real estate for development profits. She's been charging you HOA fees to use my land illegally for 15 years, collecting money for access she had no legal right to provide. I held up grandfather's 1947 deed, pointing to survey markers visible around the property perimeter. Every vehicle here is trespassing. Every boat launch is theft of private property rights. Every dollar in HOA fees paid for lake access was fraud because the HOA never owned the land you've been using. Kendall grabbed the microphone with desperation that smelled like expensive perfume mixed with panic sweat. The property boundaries were adjusted for community benefit, she declared, her voice cracking under pressure. This is a legal matter being resolved through proper channels. The admission was captured by 3 news cameras and 200 smartphone recordings. On live television, she'd just confessed to illegally adjusting property boundaries for development purposes. Sheriff deputies arrested her for conspiracy to commit fraud as the crowd watched in stunned silence. Real estate developers who'd planned to buy subdivided lots fled the scene when they realized development contracts were based on stolen land. HOA board members resigned on camera rather than face criminal liability for managing facilities on private property. The evidence presentation was systematic and devastating. Original deed documents displayed on festival tables, professional survey confirmation of GPS boundaries, security footage of Kendall bribing county inspectors, recorded admissions of illegal demolition without permits. County prosecutor arrived to announce criminal investigation into systematic HOA fraud affecting multiple military families during deployments. Federal authorities were investigating mail fraud charges for targeting deployed service members with property theft schemes. The visual of Kendall being handcuffed next to her white Range Rover, surrounded by families she'd manipulated into unknowingly stealing from a military veteran, created the perfect conclusion to months of property warfare. Justice served with maximum public accountability and undeniable legal documentation. As news helicopters circled overhead and social media exploded with festival footage, the community finally understood what had really been happening while they'd been told to avoid the problem military neighbor. They'd been weaponized against someone who'd been protecting their interests all along, by someone who'd planned to steal from all of them eventually. Within 72 hours of Kendall's arrest, the community transformation was remarkable. Emergency HOA meetings drew standing room-only crowds as property owners demanded accountability from board members who'd enabled systematic fraud. County authorities declared all HOA actions regarding my property illegal, triggering insurance claims and criminal investigations. Kendall faced federal charges for mail fraud targeting deployed military personnel, conspiracy to commit property theft, and bribery of public officials. Her real estate license was suspended pending criminal resolution. 3 other military families filed similar lawsuits after discovering they'd been targeted with identical property theft schemes during overseas deployments. The insurance settlement exceeded all expectations. My demolished mansion claim paid $400,000 plus punitive damages for illegal destruction without permits. The insurance company subrogated against the HOA for full recovery since they'd paid claims based on fraudulent violations. But the real financial resolution came through community cooperation rather than legal warfare. Faced with losing lake access and $50,000 to $100,000 in property values, homeowners agreed to emergency HOA assessment funding, a $2.16 million settlement for 15 years of retroactive land use fees. Nobody wanted protracted litigation that would cloud property titles and destroy neighborhood relationships. The settlement negotiations felt more like mission planning than hostile bargaining, systematic problem solving with clearly defined objectives and mutual benefit outcomes. The permanent easement agreement protected everyone's interests with military precision. Each household pays $200 monthly for perpetual beach access rights, with annual cost of living adjustments. Legal easement properly recorded with county authorities, ensuring clear title for future property transfers. I used settlement funds to build a new lakefront mansion that honors grandfather's memory while serving community needs. The expanded foundation includes meeting space for HOA gatherings and veteran support services. The design incorporates wheelchair accessibility and family gathering areas that previous house had lacked. $300,000 went toward establishing Grandfather's Dock Veterans Rehabilitation Fishing Program, providing therapeutic lake access for combat veterans dealing with PTSD and physical disabilities. The program operates year-round with professional counselors and adaptive fishing equipment funded through community donations. Annual Military Appreciation Day brings together active duty, veterans, and community families for lakefront celebration, honoring service and sacrifice. Kids learn about military engineering, property rights, and standing up for family values. The educational component ensures future generations understand both military service and legal property ownership. The Scholarship Fund for military children pursuing engineering careers has already supported 5 students through college preparation programs. Community members volunteer as mentors, creating connections between civilian professionals and military families that strengthen neighborhood bonds. New HOA leadership includes mandatory veteran representation and transparent financial management, preventing future fraud schemes. Property management contracts require bonding and insurance protecting against theft by management companies. Community decisions affecting property rights require supermajority votes with legal review. My son visits monthly now, learning surveying and engineering traditions that his great-grandfather started on this same lake 73 years ago. Watching him handle grandfather's brass compass with the same reverence I learned as a child creates generational continuity that Kendall's scheme had nearly destroyed. The memorial room in our new mansion displays grandfather's surveying equipment, family military service records, and letters from community members expressing gratitude for protecting their property values. The room serves as a reminder that sometimes defending what's right requires courage to fight systems that seem too powerful to challenge. PTSD symptoms that had worsened during the property warfare have decreased significantly with restored sanctuary and sense of justice served. The lake that grandfather used for fishing therapy after World War II continues providing healing for another generation of combat veterans.